For a little while there, it really looked like the king had been dethroned. OpenAI's ChatGPT just exploded onto the scene with so much force, it seemed like it could upend the entire tech world. But the story of this AI race isn't just about a new company's sudden rise. It's about how an established giant, Google, managed to stage one of the most incredible comebacks in recent tech history.
And the whole turning point? It didn't start with some grand announcement. It actually started with a name that a project manager made up at 2:30 in the morning. He needed a placeholder for a new super-fast image generator and just typed in Nano Banana, a mashup of some personal nicknames. But then, unexpectedly, the tool just took off. It started topping performance charts, it was trending everywhere, and it blew past all the usage expectations. It was a subtle sign, but a powerful one, that the momentum was starting to shift.
And that momentum, it just kept building. After the viral success of tools like Nano Banana, by September, Google's main AI app, Gemini, had climbed all the way to the top. It became the #1 most downloaded app in Apple's entire app store. That was a pretty clear signal that the public was now really starting to pay attention to what Google was doing.
So all these small wins were really just the opening act for a much, much bigger strategic victory. By the end of 2025, after a really intense period of pressure and internal reshuffling, Google had actually managed to leapfrog its rivals. Its latest models were outperforming the competition, and the company had successfully reclaimed its spot at the very front of the AI pack. But here's the thing. This comeback wasn't some sudden flip of a switch. To really understand how Google pulled this off, you have to go back more than a decade and look at the deep, foundational investments the company had been making in artificial intelligence, long before it became this global phenomenon. The groundwork they laid was extensive. It really started back in 2011 with the creation of Google Brain, their dedicated AI research team. Then, that was followed up by the huge acquisition of the London-based lab DeepMind in 2014. But maybe the most important move of all came around 2015, when Google started designing its own custom AI chips, their Tensor Processing Units, or TPUs. That was an incredible bet on a future that would need a massive amount of computing power. And this whole long-term vision was made official in 2016, when the CEO, Sundar Pichai, declared that the company's future was going to be AI first. So, with all this incredible tech, you would think they would be first out of the gate, right? Well, not exactly. Despite having all this foundational technology, Google was actually extremely cautious. There were really serious internal worries about the safety and accuracy of public chatbots. The fear that these models could produce biased or just plain wrong answers led the company to move very, very slowly. And that decision would soon leave them wide open. And that vulnerability was completely exposed in late 2022 with the explosive arrival of OpenAI's ChatGPT. It was a moment that sent shockwaves not just through Google, but really across the entire technology industry. The impact was just immediate and staggering. I mean, think about this. ChatGPT signed up 1 million users in its first 5 days. The public's fascination with this new kind of AI was suddenly undeniable. And Google, well, they looked like they had been caught completely flat-footed. And this slide really puts it all into perspective. Just a few months before ChatGPT launched with totally unrestricted access, Google had offered a tiny glimpse of its own model, Lambda. But you could only try it through a tightly controlled app, and one of its main features was limited to having conversations about dogs. This huge difference in approach just highlighted how far behind Google seemed to be in the public's mind. Internally, at Google, the arrival of ChatGPT was seen as nothing less than an existential threat. Employees who'd been working on this tech for years were just stunned. And externally, investors were getting really worried that chatbots could completely undermine Google's core search and advertising business, a part of the company that brought in over $250 billion. The pressure was just immense. So, what do you do when you're facing a threat like that? Well, Google started to mobilize. The company kicked off this massive effort to coordinate its huge and sometimes separate resources, bringing together research divisions and product teams to finally mount a real counteroffensive. That initial response, though, it was not smooth. The company rushed out its first chatbot, which was called Bard, and the launch was a public relations stumble. In one of their own promotional videos, the chatbot gave a wrong answer about the James Webb Space Telescope. And this mistake wasn't just embarrassing, it sent the company's stock down by 8%, which only made that sense of crisis even deeper. This whole crisis actually had a really interesting effect. It brought co-founder Sergey Brin back into the fold. He was spurred to return to working full-time, and he started focusing on fixing the issues with Google's models. He really emphasized that the company needed to lean on its deep institutional knowledge and that long history in AI research to find a way forward. Okay, so a key piece of this whole puzzle was a new initiative called Project Magi. Led by Liz Reed, its challenge was pretty monumental. Basically, reinvent Google's golden goose, web search, for the age of AI. The whole goal was to transform search from just a list of blue links into a system that could give you clear, direct answers to complicated questions, even if that information was scattered all over the web. And this is where everything starts to come together. All of these different efforts, the internal reorganization, the renewed focus from the founders, this mission to reinvent search, it all began to converge with the development of Google's next generation AI models known as Gemini. And this is where the company's long-term strategy finally started to give them a real, decisive edge. Now, one of the key reasons Gemini was so different came down to its foundation. It was multimodal. While early versions of ChatGPT were trained mostly on text from the internet, Google trained Gemini from the very beginning on a combination of text, code, audio, images, and video. Now, this approach took a lot longer, but in the end, it created a much more versatile and capable model. And that patient, multimodal approach, it paid off big time. With the release of Gemini 3, as you can see from these performance benchmarks, Google's model surged past its competitors. For the first time since this whole race began, Google was demonstrably in the lead when it came to capability. And that technical lead translated directly into real-world numbers. By October, the Gemini app had grown to over 650 million monthly users. It was a clear testament to its rapidly improving performance and its growing appeal with the public. And that massive user growth was really only possible because of Google's hidden weapon, its custom hardware. That early decision from almost a decade ago to develop its own TPU chips was now a huge competitive advantage. Their latest version, the Ironwood chip, dramatically reduced the cost of running these AI models, which allowed Google to scale up its services much more efficiently than its rivals could. So Google's successful comeback didn't just put them back in the lead, it actually reshaped the entire AI landscape, and it even led to some surprisingly beneficial outcomes for the company in totally different areas. And here's a fascinating little twist in all of this. The very threat that AI posed to Google's search business ended up giving them an unexpected legal benefit. During a major antitrust ruling, Google's lawyers were actually able to argue that the rise of AI chatbots meant its monopoly on search had effectively ended. And that argument helped the company avoid some of the more severe penalties, turning a business threat into a legal silver lining. By December of 2025, the feeling inside the company was completely different. CEO Sundar Pichai sent out a triumphant internal memo to his employees, and his words really captured the scale of the turnaround. He said, "Thinking back to where we were as a company even just a year ago, it's incredible to see the progress." So Google's journey from crisis to comeback really shows us that deep, foundational investments can ultimately overcome even the most disruptive challenges. But it also leaves us with this huge question about the future. As AI gets fully woven into how we find information, are we watching the end of the search engine as we've always known it, or are we just witnessing its most profound reinvention yet?